Had a situation where the garage had to be used to store tiles. A long story, not going to get into it. But in doing so, this bike was kind of out of commission. The key was left on somehow. Battery went dead, had to replace the battery. Couldn't get to the bike. Long story short, gas rot. I had decided that before I was going to get into this bike and do this video, having done the previous video on the 650 over there, and I'll post that link above, a lot of people had mentioned on some of the Yamaha forums that it was a complete waste of time, that I should simply use a product like this. And I would generally never ever do this, right? But I said, okay, fine. In the spirit of science, I had disconnected the gas tank, and I had connected a hose with a separate tank. I used quite a strong mixture, in fact, in that separate tank, much more than it calls for, to fill up the carburetor, let it run for a while, let it fill the bowl, soak for a couple days, and see if it broke up that matter that closes up the different jets. And it didn't work, right? So that was my experiment. I'm not impressed, and I'm going to proceed forward with what was my original intent. And that is basically a couple months late again due to unscheduled house reservations, is going to be my yearly service on this bike anyway. And I'm just going to take it a bit further in taking out these carbs. While I do the yearly service, I'm going to open them up and clean them out. So I'm going to add carburetor cleaning to this video, and basically make this a yearly cleaning video with a more intensive carburetor cleaning. Because of all the construction that happened out front, we could see the thick layer of dust. I'm going to wash this bike before I do anything. It's disgusting. And then we're going to just get underway. Yeah, that made a big difference. Set that to dry, and we'll take her apart. Also point out, this has a classic indication of failure in the carb. The only way to run this bike is on full choke, and what you get is about 1,000 RPM at full choke. And if you cut off the choke about halfway, the bike dies, because it's only really running on, it's not really a choke, it's an enricher valve, and it's only really running off the enricher valve to provide any gas because the jets are plugged. Also, as I start doing this, I want to record problems that I find along the way. For instance, the fuel valve here, which I can't say on YouTube, is not working correctly. It's leaking. So that's been noted. I'm gonna have to order a seal for that. I have this hose here just coming up and tied off, so that when it's disconnected from the tank is just not leaking onto the floor. Since I already have that hose in place, however, I'll start with the first step and connect that hose to a gas can and start draining this gas. I've mixed some fresh gas in with this bad gas, and it's already draining a little because the valve is broken. But I will now switch it up to reserve and get this underway. You can hear it starting now. While the tank is draining, I start by removing the bolt for the rear seat. The seat will then slide back and out under that hook right there. You can see that. This piece is done. Next will be the front seat. Backing out. There we go. Removing the seat will expose these two bolts, M12 over here, which get removed. Then this plastic retainer is pushed up from the bottom, like that, so that it can be pulled out, like that. And then this is simply lifted and dropped on top, like so. I have an under-tank lighting system that I have to remove right quick, which is not part of a standard VSTAR install. As the tank is lifted up, a white harness will be exposed right here. It sits under this box. This needs to be disconnected. I'm going to turn this to off, not that it really does any good anymore, and disconnect this hose from the tank. And this is ready to be pulled. It uses the same system as the 650 with the rubber grommets up front here. So tank is going to come up and back to be seated off of those grommets. I will show as it comes out. I can't do it with one hand. At this point, the tank is removed. Here is the rubber grommets that secured the tank in the front of the bike. And here are the interlocks on the front of the tank that held the grommet in place. That's why it was pulled back to dislodge it. Then it was lifted up from the back and pulled out. Note that my bike is slightly modified. It has a Max Air kit installed. The differences only apply to the first portion of this, and then everything remains the same. You can see clearly that the air filter on this bike is entirely for show and storage, believe it or not, of emergency tools in here. We're going to remove this air box to gain access to the carburetor. Now remove the inner portion of the air box. I'm going to remove the Max Air air filters here, this balance tube, and the connection to the breather. This set's going to come off here now. With that, we now have access to this intake tube right here, and we will remove that now. This first hose has been labeled as number 1. On this side, I'll loosen the bracket that holds the choke in place. Just a little bit. I have to get that out of there. There we go. Choke's removed. Pull that out of this harness here and then back through the bottom of the bike just to get it out of the way of the carburetor. Next, I remove this 90-degree intake fitting labeled number 2. And that will be followed by the loosening of the 2 throttle cables. 10 mil loosens the first connection to the throttle cable. So I'll loosen that now. There we go, that's done. I do recollect putting a cable tie around this one, and it's because you could only tighten it so tight and it seemed that it would vibrate loose after a time, and the cable tie stopped the screw from rotating, and that's why it's there. I'm going to clip it and then I'm going to loosen that nut. Now I need to remove this front cover here. It's these 2 bolts right here. Good access to the carburetor here, this last hose that I need to disconnect, and obviously the throttle cables as I mentioned. Now the throttle cables have been removed, the hose is removed. There are some electrical connections that come off of the carburetor, and they sit on these retainer clips here. Just very easily pull them out of those retainer clips, and then they are disconnected from the harness over here. Now these cables are disconnected from the carburetor. In the final steps, each cylinder of the carb will have to be loosened off of the intake here, and it is done by loosening this screw. Now to get the carb out, what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it. So the side with this sticker is going to go back, and this side is going to come forward to dislodge them from the manifolds here. I can't do it on camera, but it's going to rotate like this. And it's going to take a little work. It's going to wiggle and rotate at the same time. Eventually they will pop out of these fittings. And about 5 seconds later, it is removed. We can see the carburetor is unseated, and it's just kind of sitting in here right now. And then it just needs to be worked through and out the side of the motorcycle. There's no strategy about the last part. It's just a matter of trying to get it through and around all of the little pieces until it's finally removed. And there it is. All that work just to get the carbs out of this bike. It's not one of the easiest bikes to pull carbs from, but there it is. And I can already smell the gas rot as I stand here. Once the carburetor is removed, the first thing that should be done before anything else is clean paper towels should be put in the intake manifolds like shown, so that no foreign matter or debris ends up in the engine. And I mean clean paper towel, not dirty shop rags. This is very important that this is done. This is it. This is the full breakdown ready for service for the VSTAR 1100. The first thing I'm going to get underway with is obviously going to be the carburetor disassembly, cleaning, and rebuild of both sides. And after it'll be in the bike, there'll be a subsequent exercise to rebalance or synchronize the carburetors together. So I hope you found this video informative and enjoyable. Thanks for watching.
I'm done.